So can we start off with, can you state your first and last name
Okay, Jeff Rankin, Rankin,
and your position here at Monmouth?
I am Director of College Communications, but I also do sort of work on the side as sort of a college historian.
Okay, awesome. All right, so to start off, what can you tell us about Jenny after Monmouth?
Well, after she and her friends founded Pi Beta Phi, they all kind of went their separate ways, except that she and her really lifelong friend, Emma Kilgore, both lived near Little York. And Emma got married to Dr. Kilgore, who was he was a physician. He'd been in prison during the Civil War in a Confederate prison, and they married and still maintained close connections with Jenny. And Jenny was always kind of interested in the medical profession. And Dr. Kilgore came down with cholera, I believe, and nobody would come to the house to help them out or anything, Emma and her husband, but Jenny did, and she nursed them back to health, and so she was, quite from early on. I think she was interested in helping people. And it was kind of during that time that Dr. Kilgore said, you really ought to think about going into the profession. And supposedly he lent her some of his medical textbooks at that point that she sort of eagerly devoured. And he urged her to go to a women's medical school in Philadelphia. He also urged his own wife, Emma, to go to the school, but she didn't. She decided not to. But anyway, she enrolled, and it was unusual in that time for women to go to medical school. This was the 1870s, and it just wasn't done much. I think it was about 1850 when the first women were even allowed to go to medical school. So, but at Monmouth, she took the scientific course of study, which, from the beginning, women were allowed to do that. It was somewhat unusual, but, she just had a proclivity for science. So that's what she did, and graduated from the medical school in Philadelphia, and I don't know, do you want me to
well, okay, more? So what was the degree that she got from Monmouth? Like, what specific field was it?
She would have gotten, I believe at that time it would have just been called a Bachelor of Science degree.
Bachelor of Science, okay.
Yeah.
All right. What lasting impact, obviously, besides Pi Beta Phi, did you think Jenny had on Monmouth?
Well, I think Pi Beta Phi had an impact beyond just being founded here as the first women's secret society. I think it set the stage for Kappa Kappa Gamma to be founded 3 years later. It drew attention to Monmouth as sort of the founding place of the Monmouth duo, and it also, I think, brought strong young women together and made them feel like they really had a purpose and that they could do really what they wanted to. And so I think that in the long run was sort of the lesson. And all the fraternities were abolished by the Presbyterian Church by the end of the 1870s, and because there was a general church ban on secret societies, including the Masons. But I think it was just the strength of those founders, and that they had set such deep roots that those, even though they were underground for about 40, 50 years, they were able to come back in the 1920s and 30s and have an even more robust Greek system at Monmouth. If those first founders hadn't been just so strong-minded and strong-willed, and really they were very reluctant to sign the pledge that they would disband. I think it was that sort of determination that allowed them to reconstitute many years later.
Okay. You may or may not know this, but Jenny's time here at Mom, did she ever come back and visit, or?
You know, I'm guessing she might have. Um, I mean, you know, the family still lived in Little York. I know she went to Switzerland to study and died over there. But I think there might have been some time in between when
Okay.
she would have come back. I mean, in those days, rail transportation was pretty widespread, and you could travel to the East Coast in a couple of days and back. And so I would kind of bet she probably did.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of going back to my last question, what lasting impact do you think she had on the field of science?
Well, I think in one interesting way, she, even though she died young, she became sort of the namesake for this home in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, that the Pi Phi's founded a hospital to help poor, impoverished people, and you know, they gave it her name, and so she was kind of the inspiration for that, and so that became sort of one of their philanthropies, and still going strong today. So, you know, that combined with the fact that she was one of, you know, a handful of women in the 1870s who went to this medical school and helped promote that profession among women. And you know, they were small numbers, but everyone that did that probably had an impact on the overall kind of momentum of women in science.
You may have touched on this earlier, but did she ever marry?
No, she never did. She remained single. I think she was just dedicated to her profession, and I don't know if she had you know, a beau or anything like that. I think, you know, she was just totally into her medicine.
Did she have children? Or?
No, she didn't.
All right. Moving on, how did the formation of Pi Beta Phi affect? Well, actually, we already touched on that, so we'll leave that one. Okay. I think this will be our last question. What, additionally to what you described before, what events led to the founding of Pi Beta Phi?
Well, let me, excuse me, let me get my voice back. Okay, so Pi Beta Phi, I think, you know, it's unique to Monmouth because of the circumstances that surrounded the founding of Monmouth College. Monmouth was founded coeducational from the very beginning, which was quite unusual. The colleges in the Midwest that did allow women usually didn't allow them to take the same courses as men. They thought they weren't up to it, they weren't capable, or it wasn't within their realm of interest. But at Monmouth, as in Jenny's case, you could take the scientific course. You could do exactly the same things that the men did. And it just so happened that within about a half a decade after the college was founded, the Civil War broke out, and it was, you know, in the Midwest, you know, every able-bodied young man basically enlisted in the Union Army if they could. And that was certainly the case with Monmouth's student body. It was a small student body at the time, just, you know, maybe 150 or something like that. So basically the campus was the men pretty much abandoned campus, and the college was even still under construction at that time. The old main building wasn't even built, so things were precarious. But the women were here, and they carried on, and they gained a great deal of independence. And so Jenny and about a dozen of her friends, they were very tight-knit group, and they were very independent, and they listened to President Wallace deliver a lot of his little homilies. He was very much into telling young people how they should deport themselves, and he used to talk about how he thought it was unseemly for young women and men to be walk in company with each other. It just wasn't right, and he said it's far better to go forth holding a lantern aloft independently than to be seen with a gentleman. And so a group of women took that to heart, and they formed what they called the Lantern Brigade, and they went around at night with their lantern, and they called themselves independent chaperones, and these were the young women that would found Pi Beta Phi. And actually, when the men came back from the war, they had met a lot of soldiers who came from East Coast colleges where fraternities were pretty common, and they decided, hey, you know, that's we have literary societies, but they're not secret, they're not, you know, steeped in tradition, so we want to form fraternities. And the women who were here, who had been here all along, they said, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to do the same. And so they did. And you know, there was no such thing as a sorority, so they called themselves a fraternity as well. And so that group of women, they got together in the summer, they planned, and they unveiled their big idea, and then it wasn't long before it started spreading to other campuses in the Midwest, and other chapters were formed.
Okay. Any last words about Jenny?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think what I could say. I mean, I guess, you know, the historic part of it, you know, she's buried. They brought her body back from Switzerland. She's buried in a cemetery by Little York in the family plot. Virtually her entire family died in unfortunate circumstances. Her younger brother was killed at Fort Donelson in the Civil War. She had another brother that died in the Mississippi. Her father died when she was, I think, 16. And she had one brother, William, that lived to adulthood, and he became a successful farmer in Warren County. And so there are still Nichols around that were descended from her brother William. So, you know, they were a strong family. I think, you know, it was probably in the genes. She was very intelligent, but very driven, and you know, I guess she serves as a great role model as one of the founders.
Awesome. Any questions from you guys? All right. Well, thank you.
Well, I hope that sounded halfway.
Thank you.